Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling some really complex and, let's be frank, heavily debated source material concerning September 11th, 2001.
That's right. We're going deep into the physical evidence, the engineering side of things, expert testimonies, basically all the elements that raise some pretty fundamental questions about the official story of the World Trade Center collapses.
And our mission here, just to be crystal clear, is to synthesize what these sources say. We're looking at documented facts, professional analyses, things that challenge that main narrative.
Exactly. We're not here to point fingers or push a specific theory. Our job is just to lay out the claims and the evidence presented in the material, impartially. Let the details speak for themselves, you know?
Okay, so the sources kick off with something almost visceral, an initial observation. Let's talk about how people watching it unfold, even from, say, Tasmania, felt something was off.
Yeah, the way the towers came down, that symmetry, the speed, it looked, and this is a word used in the source, orchestrated, not like a random chaotic structural failure. That gut feeling, it seems, leads straight into the first big physical puzzle the sources bring up, the impact itself.
Right.
Basic mechanics. How does a relatively, soft, hollow aluminum plane slice so cleanly through those massive steel perimeter columns without just shattering on impact?
The source calls this the bird strike reality. I mean, we know a 4-pound goose hitting a jet engine can be catastrophic, right?
Precisely. If soft tissue or even thin aluminum can wreck an engine or damage the airframe that badly, well, the physics of a huge aluminum wing cutting through heavy steel columns designed to hold up the entire building practically, it raises questions.
It's about soft versus hard impacts, isn't it? These towers weren't flimsy. They had that strong steel perimeter designed for huge wind loads.
Absolutely. The plane skin, the wings, they're mostly hollow, lightweight aluminum, even moving fast. The material science, according to these sources, suggests the wings should have crumpled, disintegrated more on hitting that dense steel structure, not penetrated so cleanly, so deep.
Okay, but let's say we accept the penetration, then we hit another wall, right? The history of steel buildings and fire. Yeah, there's a core point in the material. It's stark. For over 100 years of steel frame skyscraper construction, globally, zero. Not one had ever collapsed solely due to fire. Zero. Until 9/11. Then suddenly, 3 buildings, WTC-1, 2, and later WTC-7, all attributed officially to fire and impact damage.
It's a statistical anomaly, to say the least. The sources bring up the Mandarin Oriental hotel fire in Beijing 2009. Steel structure, burned like crazy for 5 hours, totally engulfed.
And it stayed standing.
It stayed standing. The physics usually dictates localized fire means localized failure, maybe partial collapse, maybe leaning, but not this total symmetrical straight-down collapse.
And the third big initial issue is temperature versus people surviving. The whole official theory relies on intense heat, right? Like 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe more, weakening the steel.
But then you have those photos. People clearly visible, standing in the impact holes, waving for help, just minutes before the towers came down.
Which means it couldn't have been that hot right there.
Well, it implies a survivable temperature, probably under, say, 150, maybe 200 degrees Fahrenheit, right in the hole next to the supposed inferno. If the heat needed to buckle massive steel columns deep inside the building was really there, 1,500 degrees plus.
Then those impact holes should have been unsurvivable, just from radiant heat alone. It's a direct contradiction. According to the sources, you can't really have both. Heat intense enough to cause catastrophic structural failure, and conditions cool enough for people to survive right next to it. Okay, that's a really powerful starting point. Let's dig deeper into that heat issue. Part 1. The puzzling physics of the Twin Towers, WTC-1 and 2, the fire problem.
Right, the core of the official theory is weakened steel. Now, steel starts to soften, but it doesn't actually melt until around 2,750 degrees Fahrenheit.
And the fires. Jet fuel burns hot, but not that hot, does it?
Jet fuel's max in open air is maybe 1,800 degrees. And
Yeah.
crucially, that initial jet fuel fire, it likely burned off in the first few minutes. What was left burning for hours was office stuff, paper, carpets, furniture.
Which burns at lower temperatures.
Yeah, typically more like 1,100 to 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, much lower than the melting point of steel.
The sources use this kitchen stove analogy. Explain that. Steel doesn't melt at 1,500 degrees, okay? But doesn't it weaken significantly? Why downplay that?
Well, the analogy highlights the difference between localized heat and weakening a massive structure. Your gas stove flame, that can hit over 3,500 degrees F.
Okay.
Put a heavy steel pot on it, it gets hot, sure, but does it collapse? No. It holds its shape for ages because its mass helps dissipate the heat. The WTC beams were enormous, far more massive than a pot, designed to shed heat.
So the argument is you'd need that intense heat, sustained, across many critical points simultaneously, not just scattered office fires.
Exactly. Not just localized fires hitting a few beams here and there, especially given the tower's design.
But the counter is always the impact damage, right? That the planes took out key supports, stripped fireproofing, created a unique weak spot. A perfect storm.
That is the official explanation, yes. But the sources push back, citing the tower's immense redundancy. They were engineered with huge safety margins, designed to withstand major damage, even multiple impacts, according to some analyses.
How much damage could they supposedly take?
Cited engineering studies suggest they could lose potentially over half their vertical load-bearing capacity and still stand. Steel keeps 50% of its strength even at 1100 degrees F, and still 10% at 1800 F. The kind of total simultaneous failure we saw, it required something systemic, affecting the core and perimeter all at once.
Which makes that specific eyewitness account you mentioned earlier even more potent. FDNY Battalion Chief Oriole Palmer's radio call from inside the South Tower.
Yes, this is a crucial piece of testimony cited. Chief Palmer, a veteran firefighter, made it up to the 78th floor of the South Tower near the impact zone, minutes before collapse.
And what did he report? His words were, "We've got 2 isolated pockets of fire. We should be able to knock it down with 2 lines." 2 isolated pockets, not a raging inferno.
That's his report, from an experienced chief right at the scene. It directly challenges the idea of a floor-wide inferno powerful enough to trigger a total structural collapse just minutes later.
Wow. Okay, isolated pockets leading to total collapse. That's a huge disconnect. Let's shift gears then to maybe the most striking physical evidence, the speed. The free fall problem, right? Moving from heat to motion. Yeah. Both towers came down in roughly 10 seconds.
And free fall from that height.
It's about 9.2 seconds if there were absolutely zero resistance from the structure below.
So less than a 1-second difference between reality and falling through thin air. Why is that physically problematic? Because of progressive collapse physics. For the top part to fall, it has to crush everything beneath it. 80-plus floors of concrete slabs, steel trusses, the massive core columns. Each floor must offer resistance.
It takes time and energy to break things.
Exactly. Each floor destroyed should have slowed the descent significantly. Sources calculate that even a conservative progressive collapse, say, half a second per floor.
Should have taken much longer.
Minimum 55 seconds, maybe closer to a minute or more, not 10.
The domino analogy they use makes sense. Even perfectly lined up dominoes take time to fall. The building should have acted like a break.
A massive break. The 10-second collapse implies the structure below offered virtually zero resistance. It just wasn't there, which is characteristic of controlled demolition, where supports are removed simultaneously.
And it wasn't just the speed, but the way it started, particularly at the South Tower. It tilted.
Yes. It started with a very noticeable tilt, around 23 degrees off vertical. This brings up the angular momentum issue.
Basic physics, right? Newton's laws. What should have happened?
Well, think of chopping a tree. Once it starts leaning, that top mass carries its momentum. The top 15-20 floors of the South Tower, with that much mass and that angle, they should have continued tilting, falling off diagonal, away from the building's footprint.
Like a huge block breaking off and falling sideways.
Exactly. Or like a smokestack being demolished from one side. It tips over.
But that didn't happen.
No. The sources emphasize that the tilting mass somehow seemed to correct itself, disintegrating into dust while falling almost straight down through the path of greatest resistance, the intact lower part of the building.
How could it do that?
For the fall to become vertical again, the resistance on the opposite side of the tilt must have been removed almost instantly, allowing it to descend symmetrically. It suggests the failure wasn't just localized at the tilt point, but widespread and synchronized. Okay, this is really challenging stuff. And it leads us right to the third building, the one not hit by a plane. Let's get into part 2, the anomaly of WTC-7. WTC-7 is, for many researchers cited in these sources, the clearest piece of the puzzle, scientifically speaking. It's a 47-story steel-framed skyscraper, stood about 300 feet from the North Tower, no plane impact, but it collapsed completely, symmetrically, at 5:20 p.m. that evening. And the official explanation from NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is that it's the only steel-framed skyscraper in history to collapse solely due to fire.
The only one, ever. That statistical uniqueness is hard to ignore. It really is. The sources use a house fire analogy. Even a typical wooden house fire, which can be incredibly intense, often leaves walls or structural frames partially standing. For a modern steel skyscraper to just pancake completely from scattered office fires. The engineers find it structurally baffling. But the smoking gun for WTC-7, the thing even the official report had to acknowledge, is the speed, right? The free fall.
Absolutely critical. NIST's own final report confirmed that WPC-7 fell at absolute gravitational acceleration freefall for a period of 2.25 seconds.
2.25 seconds of free fall. What does that translate to in terms of distance?
That's equivalent to about 8 stories, roughly 100 feet, dropping as if the structure beneath it simply wasn't there. Zero resistance. That's the literal definition of free fall in this context.
And the source is, quote, structural engineer Ron Brookman saying. What was it? His point was simple physics. You cannot have a natural gravitational collapse at freefall speed unless the columns below have been removed, instantly and completely, which directly contradicts the official NIST theory for WTC-7, doesn't it? What was their explanation again?
NIST blamed it on a single point of failure. They claimed heat from fires, maybe helped by some debris impact from the North Tower hours earlier, caused one specific column, column 79, to buckle.
Just one column.
Yeah, initiating a cascade failure. But the analogy used here is the table leg analogy.
Right, if one leg on your table breaks.
The whole table doesn't collapse straight down, perfectly level through the floor, does it? It tips over violently towards the broken leg. For WTC-7 to fall straight down, symmetrically, into its own footprint.
All the supports across the whole building, core and perimeter, had to fail at virtually the same instant.
That's the structural reality argued by the sources. A single column failure just doesn't produce that kind of collapse.
And there's eyewitness testimony about WTC-7 from much earlier in the day, too.
Yes, the sources highlight the account of Barry Jennings. He was the Deputy Director of Emergency Services for the NYC Housing Authority, and he was inside WTC-7 that morning.
What did he report?
He reported hearing and seeing explosions before either of the Twin Towers had even collapsed. He described the lobby of WTC-7 as looking like a bomb had gone off.
Before the towers fell. That suggests something internal, unrelated to the planes or the later tower collapses, might have already damaged WTC-7.
That's the strong implication from his testimony. And the sources also note, maybe troublingly, that Mr. Jennings passed away just days before NIST released its final report on WTC-7.
And the visual itself, the collapse video, was so striking that even news anchors commented immediately.
Yeah, Dan Rather on CBS News. His immediate unscripted reaction was that the collapse looked reminiscent of those buildings that are deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite.
When you put the visual, the confirmed free fall, the eyewitness accounts like Jennings, the single-column theory problems, WTC-7 really does stand out as a major anomaly.
According to the sources, yes. It demands an explanation that fits all the evidence, and they argue the official fire-based explanation doesn't cut it. Okay, so the physics are problematic. Let's shift to the aftermath. Part 3, missing evidence in the crime scene cleanup. This feels like a different kind of problem. It moves from physics to forensics, and yeah, it's deeply concerning to the sources cited. Ground Zero was declared a crime scene, the biggest in U.S. history. Standard procedure is preserve the evidence, right?
Absolutely. Especially in something this monumental.
Yet the most critical evidence, the structural steel from the towers, over 200,000 tons of it, was almost immediately cut up and shipped overseas, sold for scrap.
How much was actually saved for analysis?
Barely any, only 236 pieces, according to the sources. That's less than 0.1% of the total structural steel. By the spring of 2002, just months later, most of it was gone, melted down in places like China and India.
How does that compare to other major disaster investigations?
Yeah.
Like plane crashes or bombings?
It's completely counter to standard practice. Think Challenger, TWA 800, Oklahoma City. The wreckage is meticulously gathered, stored, pieced back together, examined for months, even years.
Why? What are they looking for?
Fracture patterns, signs of stress, metal fatigue, heat warping. Crucially, any residue from explosives or cutting charges. By destroying the WTC steel, especially the core columns from the impact and fire zones,
You basically eliminate the possibility of finding that kind of direct physical proof.
that's precisely the argument. It made a thorough, independent forensic analysis of the collapse mechanism impossible after the fact. The key evidence was gone.
And this pattern of missing evidence extends to the black boxes, too. 4 planes crashed.
Meaning 8 black boxes, 4 cockpit voice recorders, 4 flight data recorders. These things are built tough, designed to survive incredible impacts, heat, pressure.
And the recovery rate historically.
Over 95% in major crashes. They're almost always found, even in extreme conditions.
But the official story for the 2 WTC flights.
Is that all 4 of their black boxes were never found. supposedly destroyed beyond recovery in the collapse and fires.
Which, again, is a statistical outlier. How do the sources challenge this?
They point to eyewitness accounts from Ground Zero recovery workers. Mike Ballone and Nicholas Tomasi both went on record claiming they personally saw crews recover black boxes from the WTC debris.
So they claim the boxes were found.
Yes, but that their accounts were later officially denied or dismissed by the FBI and NTSB. So it becomes a case of conflicting testimonies versus the official never found narrative.
Okay, let's turn to the Pentagon. Flight 77. A different site, different questions. What are the main physical evidence issues there?
The big one is the hole. A Boeing 757 has a 125-foot wingspan. The entry hole in the Pentagon's outer ring wall was measured at only about 17 to 20 feet wide.
17 to 20 feet. That's tiny compared to the plane? Like a garage door opening, the source says? Yeah. So the immediate question is, where did the wings go? And the engines? The tail section? How does a 125-foot wide object fit through a 20-foot hole without leaving massive impact scars from the wings on the adjacent walls? Were there such marks?
The sources highlight the lack of clear, distinct wing impact marks on the facade. And maybe even more puzzling, photos show windows just feet away from the entry hole remained intact, undamaged.
Intact windows next to a high-speed impact of a massive jet. That seems unlikely.
It challenges the physics of such a collision, according to the engineer cited. A huge, fuel-laden wing hitting thick limestone and brick at hundreds of miles per hour should have caused catastrophic damage over a much wider area.
And the debris, what about on the long outside?
That's the other major point. Photos of the immediate aftermath show a surprising lack of large, recognizable aircraft parts on the Pentagon lawn. Where were the engines, for instance? They're made of dense titanium and steel, built to survive crashes.
What's the official explanation for the lack of debris?
Essentially that the plane mostly vaporized or disintegrated upon impact, with the debris being propelled inside the building.
But engines don't typically vaporize, do they?
Not according to aviation experts cited. They're usually among the most identifiable pieces recovered, even from the worst crashes. Their absence on the lawn is presented as a significant anomaly.
And then there's the video evidence, or the lack of it. The Pentagon must be one of the most surveilled buildings on Earth.
You'd think so. Numerous security cameras in the area from the Pentagon itself, nearby hotels, gas stations, traffic cameras. The FBI confiscated many of these tapes immediately after the attack.
But they only released
Just a handful of very grainy, blurry frames years later, frames where you can't clearly identify a large Boeing 757, the reason given for withholding the rest, national security. Which raises the question, if the videos clearly showed the 757 hitting the building, wouldn't releasing them support national security by confirming the official story and ending speculation? That's the logical question the sources pose. Why withhold clear evidence that validates your own narrative for over 2 decades? It fuels suspicion that the tapes might show something else, or perhaps nothing conclusive at all.
Okay, and Flight 93 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. More anomalies there.
Yes, quite different again. The official story is the plane crashed into a field after passengers fought the hijackers. But the physical site is strange.
How so?
A huge plane, over 100 tons, supposedly dove into the ground, but the crater it left was relatively small, maybe 15 by 30 feet, and very little recognizable wreckage was visible in the crater.
Where was the debris then?
Reportedly scattered over a very wide area, up to 8 miles away. Small pieces, engine parts, fuselage sections, personal effects, spread out over miles.
8 miles. That sounds more like something breaking up in the air.
That's what some analysts cited suggest. An 8-mile debris field is much more consistent with an aircraft disintegrating at altitude, perhaps due to an explosion or being shot down, rather than crashing intact into soft ground where it supposedly buried itself, as officials claimed.
So the physical evidence at Shanksville also doesn't neatly fit the official impact narrative.
It presents contradictions, yes. The small crater versus the vast debris field. Now, maybe the most bizarre piece of physical evidence mentioned in the sources. The passport. Ah, yes. Amidst all this destruction, steel pulverized, black boxes supposedly obliterated, computer hard drives melted, one item allegedly survived remarkably intact.
A hijacker's passport. Made of paper.
Exactly. The passport of Satam al-Suqami, one of the alleged hijackers on Flight 11, was reportedly found by a passerby in the street near the WTC site, relatively undamaged.
Let's just pause on that. It survived the 500-mile-per-hour impact, the massive jet fuel explosion, hours of intense fire, the complete collapse of a 110-story building into dust, and landed gently on the street.
While indestructible black boxes and steel engines supposedly vanished, The sources present this as an almost surreal contrast.
It's incredibly improbable, isn't it? The implication being.
The sources strongly imply it's either a near miraculous anomaly or perhaps more pointedly, evidence that may have been planted after the event to quickly establish the identity and motive of the alleged perpetrators. It just doesn't square with the physics of the event. Okay. The physical side is riddled with questions. Let's broaden the lens now to part 4. Air defense failures, war games, and the financial side. The systemic issues.
Right.
The failure of the U.S. air defense system that morning is described as unprecedented. Before 9/11, NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, had standard procedures. Intercepting off-course or unresponsive aircraft was routine.
How routine.
The sources state that fighter jets were scrambled 67 times in the months leading up to 9/11 for various incidents. The typical response time to get jets in the air was somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes max.
But on 9/11 itself, with multiple confirmed hijackings underway, the system seemed to grind to a halt. Take Flight 11, the first plane. It deviated course, turned off its transponder around 8:14 a.m. when were fighters scrambled. Not until 8:44 a.m., according to the timeline presented. A 30-minute delay. They only got airborne about 2 minutes before Flight 11 actually hit the North Tower. Far too late. And Flight 77, heading for Washington, D.C., arguably the most protected airspace on the planet.
Even more inexplicable, perhaps. It flew towards D.C., clearly off course and unresponsive, for at least 12 minutes after being detected as a potential threat.
And Andrews Air Force Base, with fighters ready to protect the Capitol, is right there, 10 miles from the Pentagon.
Yet no jets were scrambled from Andrews to intercept Flight 77 before it hit the Pentagon. For those crucial 12 minutes, the Capitol's dedicated air defense was apparently inactive, a total breakdown of standard protocol.
This brings us to that really striking testimony from Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta. He was in the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, the PEOC bunker, with Vice President Cheney.
Yes, Mineta testified to the 9/11 Commission about a specific exchange he witnessed. As the plane, Flight 77, was still approaching the Pentagon, maybe 50 miles out, then 30, then 10,
What happened?
an aide came in and asked Vice President Cheney, "The plane is 10 miles out. Do the orders still stand?"
Do the orders still stand? What orders?
Exactly. According to Mineta, Cheney snapped his head up and replied sharply, "Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?"
The sources interpret this how?
As potentially explosive evidence. It strongly suggests there were pre-existing orders in place before the plane was close, orders that were perhaps preventing the standard interception, orders to stand down maybe. The fact the aide needed confirmation implies it was a known, possibly controversial directive.
And complicating this whole air defense picture were war games. Military exercises happening that exact morning.
An almost unbelievable coincidence, according to the sources. Not just one, but multiple large-scale military exercises were running simultaneously on the morning of 9/11, some involving the exact scenarios that were unfolding in reality.
Like what?
Well, NORAD itself was conducting Vigilant Guardian. This was a major exercise simulating Russian bomber attacks, but also, critically, hijacked airliners being used as weapons within the U.S.
So they were simulating hijackings while actual hijackings were happening?
Precisely. Colonel Robert Marr, the commander overseeing the Northeast Air Defense Sector that morning, even testified that the exercise injects, the fake scenarios, made it hard for his team to immediately recognize the first reports of Flight 11 as real world and not just part of the drill.
That sounds like design confusion. Were there others?
Yes. The NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, they run the spy satellites. They were running an exercise called Vigilant Warrior that morning, their simulation, an aircraft crashing into their own headquarters building just outside D.C.
Seriously, an airplane crash drill at the NRO on 9/11?
According to the sources, yes. And then there was FEMA. They had a major disaster response exercise, Tripod 2, scheduled to start in New York City on September 12th, the next day.
What was Tripod 2 for?
It was a biochemical attack simulation, but it meant that FEMA personnel, command posts, communication gear, emergency equipment, much of it was already being moved into place in NYC right near Ground Zero on September 10th and 11th, ready for a mass casualty event.
So the conclusion drawn by experts cited in the source material
Is that this unprecedented overlap of multiple highly relevant war games created a perfect storm of confusion. It paralyzed the standard response chains. Some sources go further, suggesting the exercises may have been deliberately planned or manipulated to ensure the attacks wouldn't be intercepted by masking the real events within the fog of the drills.
A mystery component is a phrase they use.
Yes, an essential component for ensuring the attack succeeded. The confusion was systemic.
Okay, let's follow the money. The sources point to some very suspicious financial activity just before 9/11.
This revolves mainly around stock options trading, specifically put options.
Remind us what a put option is.
It's basically a bet that a company's stock price is about to drop sharply. You buy the right to sell stock at a certain price by a certain date. If the price collapses before then, you make a fortune.
And it was unusual activity in put options
For the two airlines involved, American and United, in the days just before September 11th, the volume of put options bought on these two stocks surged massively. American Airlines saw a 4,516% increase compared to normal levels. United Airlines, a 956% increase.
Thousands of percent increase. That doesn't sound random.
The sources call it statistically impossible without foreknowledge. Someone or some group clearly anticipated a catastrophic event was about to hit those specific airlines and placed huge bets accordingly. These trades became enormously profitable right after the attacks. The SEC investigated, but ultimately didn't publicly identify who made those trades.
And then there's the WTC leaseholder, Larry Silverstein.
Yes. Silverstein Properties finalized a 99-year lease on the entire World Trade Center complex, worth $3.2 billion just 6 weeks before 9/11. A key detail the sources highlight is that Silverstein specifically insisted on including terrorism insurance in the policy.
Which turned out to be crucial.
Extremely. After the towers collapsed, he entered a complex legal battle with his insurers. He argued that because two separate planes hit the towers, they were two separate occurrences under the insurance policy.
And he won.
He eventually settled for a total payout of around $4.55 billion, a massive sum, significantly more than his initial investment, based on that interpretation of separate attacks.
This brings us back to WTC-7 again, and that quote from Silverstein about the decision to demolish it, the pull it quote.
Right. In a PBS documentary from 2002, Silverstein was talking about the situation with WTC-7 late in the afternoon on 9/11, as it was burning.
What did he say exactly?
He said, "I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such terrible loss of life, maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and we watched the building collapse."
Pull it. That term is specific, isn't it?
It's widely recognized terminology in the controlled demolition industry. It means to initiate the explosives to bring a building down intentionally.
So if they pulled WTC-7, what does that imply?
It implies the building had been prepared for demolition beforehand. Rigging a 47-story building for controlled demolition takes weeks, maybe months, of careful work placing charges, running wires. It can't be an impromptu decision made in a few hours amidst the chaos.
So the sources see Silverstein's comment, combined with the symmetrical freefall collapse, as highly suggestive, maybe even an admission, of pre-planned demolition.
That's exactly how it's presented, a critical piece of the puzzle for WTC-7.
And there was gold mentioned, too, in the WTC vaults.
Yeah, the sources mention estimates of around $770 million in gold and silver bullion stored in vaults beneath the WTC complex. Much of it was reportedly recovered, but some sources claim a significant amount remains unaccounted for. Interestingly, some gold was found loaded onto delivery trucks in the basement levels after the collapse, suggesting some movement might have been underway even before the disaster fully unfolded.
And finally, on the financial side, the beneficiaries after 9/11.
The most obvious were defense contractors and the military-industrial complex. The U.S. defense budget skyrocketed, up 139% by 2010.
Specific companies.
Halliburton, Vice President Cheney's former company, received enormous no-bid contracts for work in Iraq and Afghanistan, reportedly totaling over $39 billion. Lockheed Martin, the weapons manufacturer, saw its stock price quadruple in the following years. The wars launched in response to 9/11 created unprecedented financial opportunities for these sectors. Okay, so we've covered the physics problems, the evidence handling, the systemic failures, the financial angles. Let's bring it together in part 5. Expert dissent and the chemical smoking gun. Who are the critics? It's important to stress, as the sources do, that these aren't just random people online. The critics include thousands of highly credentialed professionals.
Like architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth?
Yes, that group now numbers over 3,000 verified architects and structural engineers who have signed a petition stating that the official explanation for the collapses, especially WTC-7, violates the laws of physics and engineering principles. They find the collapse characteristics totally inconsistent with fire alone.
And firefighters, people who were there.
Numerous testimonies from FDNY personnel collected over the years report hearing distinct sounds before and during the collapses. Not just the groaning of stressed metal, but sequences of loud bangs or explosions described as rhythmic, sequential pops.
Like demolition charges.
That's the comparison some explicitly made. One firefighter interviewed later said bluntly he believed bombs were set in the building. Their direct sensory experience on the ground contradicts the narrative of a simple, gravity-driven failure.
And pilots have weighed in, too. On Flight 77 specifically.
Yes, numerous experienced airline captains and military pilots have stated publicly that the final maneuver, Flight 77, supposedly executed that high-speed, steep-diving turn into the Pentagon wall, pulling high Gs while staying just feet above the ground, would be virtually impossible for a novice pilot, like the alleged hijacker Hani Hanjour, who reportedly had trouble flying even a small Cessna competently.
What do they suggest?
Some suggest it implies either a much more skilled pilot was at the controls, or potentially that the aircraft might have been under some form of remote control or guidance system. The maneuver was just too precise, too difficult for an amateur. Okay, now for the most direct physical evidence cited as proof of demolition. The reports of molten steel and the discovery of nanothermite. This connects back to the heat problem. Multiple credible sources, firefighters, cleanup workers, engineers on site reported seeing molten metal glowing red or orange, flowing like lava in the debris pile at Ground Zero.
Not just hot metal, but actually molten.
Yes, flowing molten metal. And these reports weren't just for the first day. They persisted for weeks, even months after 9/11. FEMA photos show excavators lifting beams dripping molten metal 21 days later.
Why is that impossible for office fires?
Because office fires, even fueled by jet fuel initially, simply don't burn hot enough to melt steel, which requires 2,750 degrees air, or sustain temperatures anywhere near that level for weeks, deep within an oxygen-starved debris pile. It defies basic thermodynamics.
The campfire versus blast furnace analogy again. Campfires don't melt steel.
Exactly. To get molten steel, especially pools of it lasting for weeks, you need temperatures far higher, typically 3,000 degrees or more, and a chemical reaction that can sustain itself without constant airflow, like a blast furnace or
thermite.
This leads directly to the chemical evidence. In 2009, a team of international scientists, including Dr. Niels Harrit from the University of Copenhagen and Dr. Stephen Jones from BYU, published a peer-reviewed paper.
What did they find?
They analyzed samples of the dust collected from Ground Zero shortly after 9/11, and they reported finding distinctive red-gray chips mixed throughout the dust.
Red-gray chips, what were they?
Through various tests, microscopy, chemical analysis, calorimetry, they concluded these chips were consistent with unreacted nanothermite, a highly energetic, military-grade composite material.
A nanothermite, explain what that is.
It's basically thermite, a mixture of aluminum powder and iron oxide engineered at the nanoscale. This makes it much more reactive and energetic than traditional thermite. It can be formulated as an explosive or as a potent incendiary, designed specifically for cutting through steel.
And it burns incredibly hot.
Around 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Easily hot enough to melt steel and explain those persistent pools of molten metal reported in the debris.
And there was another byproduct found in the dust, too.
Yes. The same analysis and others found billions of microscopic iron spheres, or microspheres, in the WTC dust. These tiny, perfectly spherical balls of previously molten iron are a known characteristic byproduct of thermite reactions reaching temperatures high enough to melt iron, around 2,800 degrees.
So office fires can't create these?
No. Office fire temperatures are far too low to melt iron or steel into spheres like that. Their presence, alongside the nanothermite chips and the reports of molten steel, is presented by the sources as a trifecta of chemical evidence pointing directly to the use of advanced incendiaries or explosives in the destruction of the towers.
So putting all these pieces together, the physics, the forensics, the systemic failures, the financial anomalies, the expert dissent, the chemical evidence, what's the synthesis offered by the source material we've examined?
The overall pattern they present is one of profound inconsistency between the official narrative and a large body of documented physical evidence and expert testimony. You have the impossible physics of the collapses, the speed, the symmetry, the disintegration. You have the chemical evidence suggesting demolition,
And the systemic failures.
the inexplicable stand down of air defenses, the confusing war games, the destruction of crucial forensic evidence like the steel, the missing black boxes, the anomalies at the Pentagon and Shanksville.
Plus the financial indicators of foreknowledge and massive profit.
Right. The sources argue that when you look at all these elements together, the official explanation of fire-induced collapse becomes untenable for WTC 1, 2, and especially WTC 7.
And the motivation behind bringing all this up, according to these sources, isn't just about historical curiosity, is it?
No, they frame it as a moral imperative, that seeking the full truth honors the victims and the first responders. They argue that accepting incomplete or potentially false narratives allowed the justification for devastating wars, costing trillions of dollars and millions of lives.
And also led to the erosion of civil liberties domestically. Things like the Patriot Act.
Exactly. The consequences of not fully understanding or perhaps covering up what truly happened on 9/11 have been immense and continue to shape our world.
So the final provocative thought these sources leave us with, it connects back to accountability, doesn't it?
It does. They point out that the systems and individuals potentially implicated in the failures, the air defense breakdown, the evidence handling, perhaps even the financial dealings were largely never held accountable. In many cases, key figures were promoted.
Which leads to a disturbing question for us today.
Yes. If those mechanisms of failure, whether they were due to incompetence, confusion from drills, or something more deliberate, were never properly investigated, exposed, and reformed after 9/11, how can you, the listener, be certain that those same vulnerabilities don't exist today? How can we be sure that the systems meant to protect us are truly reliable and haven't been compromised again, or perhaps never fixed in the first place? That's the lingering uncertainty the sources compel us to consider.